Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first annual meeting of Davidsonians for Freedom of Thought and Discourse. That is, if you like what we're doing, we can repeat next year. Today, we want to celebrate a special achievement of our alma mater and take a look at why it was important and necessary. We were missing one of our featured participants in the program, but we are making tentative plans to cover until he arrives, but we'll see how that turns out. On March 2nd, 3 months ago, the Davidson College faculty, by a near unanimous vote, affirmed the statement, "Davidson's commitment to freedom of expression." Within a few weeks, the Board of Trustees did the same thing. Few of you could have predicted that. Now, it's true that affirming a statement is not quite the same as adopting it. There may be and may have been some concern that if it were incorporated into the college constitution or bylaws, we'd spend the rest of our days suing each other in court. But to affirm a statement is to endorse it, approve it, acclaim, support and defend, or otherwise promote its truths as self-evident, according to Merriam-Webster's synonyms list. It was truly a positive step and deserves to be celebrated, so we're going to celebrate it both during and after this session. We believe it was a solid victory for the cause of academic freedom of speech, thought, and discourse, and for healthy disagreement among Davidson's community of scholars, including all faculty, students, alumni, and yes, visiting speakers as well. And there's a lot of credit to go around. First, I applaud former President Carol Quillen, who took the first crucial step in appointing a panel of 6 to draft a statement that could be approved in the campus climate. While true she was unconvinced for 3 years, it's also true we wouldn't be here today had she not decided to proceed with this initiative. Great credit deserves to go to our new president, Doug Hicks, for his personal commitment to move forward and let the debate process work its way, with able support from Professor Kyra Ketras, our faculty vice chair. They showed considerable diplomatic tact, I would say, in guiding a thorough deliberation so that no one could rightly complain they were not heard and respected. And this is the way they were able to grow a sense of shared ownership for the document, shared far and wide, I would say. Certainly the 6 who wrote the Davidson statement are going to get some credit. This included 2 faculty members, 2 students, 1 alumna trustee, and 1 alumnus former chemistry professor turned politician who didn't have anything better to do. He was also a board member of DFTD. At first, the other 5, turns out, had some reluctance to incorporate more than just a sampling of basic principles from the Chicago Statement on Freedom of Expression, which, as you know, is the gold standard among colleges and universities. But within 2 meetings, we had voted to include every Chicago working principle by unanimous agreement. Clear, concise, timeless. From my vantage point, special honors are due to the man who chaired this working group, Professor Ike Bailey, made the essential case that launched the first draft. No, he never came to any of my rallies, and I guess I wouldn't have been in his, but we got to the point where we could discuss our differences without thinking we'd ever be able to own the other and begin to understand where each was coming from in views. But he assembled evidence that there was a pronounced tendency to dodge debate, especially among students from various identity groups considered somewhat marginalized by society in the past, to self-censor. Surveys showed us this was widespread. So making a case for protecting the rights of others the same as ours was the key to getting a strong, meaningful vote. Our view among leadership of Davidsonians for Freedom of Thought and Discourse was supportive, but also justified specific reference to rights for minority ideological or even partisan views. If I could paraphrase, you may protest and challenge the views of any visiting speakers, but you may not shout them down or otherwise prevent them from being heard. It's not the purpose of Davidson College to protect you from ideas you don't like or make you uncomfortable. Rather, it's our responsibility to assure that you do hear such views and can learn to understand and deal with them. Finally, I'll tell you straight out, had there not been the steady, firm insistence from this association of alumni and alumna, Davidsonians for Freedom of Thought and Discourse, nothing would have happened. That credit goes to several hundred of us, but most especially to the man who has devoted 5 solid years of his energy and loyalty, inspiring all of us to urge and help Davidson College make this vital reform. And that unique credit goes to our founder and president, John Craig, class of 1966. And we're going to hear from John a little later in the program. One other person that you met on the way in and need to get better acquainted with is Savannah Damon, Managing Director of DFTD, with our office just off campus. If she's here, I would ask her to stand, but you saw her outside. Oh, she's standing because she doesn't have a place to sit yet. Back there. Savannah is a political science graduate of Lenore Ryan University, where she also earned her Master of Business Administration degree. Before joining DFTD, she was a research analyst at the Senate of the State of Pennsylvania, I believe Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, having worked as a political consultant on both congressional and Commonwealth legislative campaigns in Pennsylvania. So be sure to introduce yourself again to Savannah Damon. The heart of today's program is to present and hear from a panel of young students from varied backgrounds. Their experiences will give you a clearer understanding of what happens when there's uncertainty about the consequences of declaring different views than those of a professor or other students on controversial topics. So they will speak for themselves. I'll ask you to please stand and come forward as I talk about you. First, Yusuf Ahmed, and the others wait on him. Yusuf, you're up first, alphabetically. Class of 2025, biology major with a minor in Arab studies. Yusuf is a member of the Davidson College football team, as well as secretary of the Muslim Student Association at Davidson. Barclay Briggs, 2024 economics major. He's also a member of the Davidson College football team and president of the Fish and Wildlife Club. You know I knew that. Barclay was selected by us as DFTD's student fellow for 2023-24. Keely Copper. The reason I'm smiling is the late Kenny Shue has just arrived, but have a seat, Kenny. I'll get to you in a moment. Keely Copper is a 2023 biology graduate from Davidson College. At Davidson, Keely was a member of the women's soccer team, member of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and member of Connor Eating House. Next, Lindy Morgan, 2023 chemistry graduate from Davidson College. And I know they always told you how fortunate you were that I was not there for your organic chemistry class. At Davidson, Lindy was also a student athlete on the women's soccer team. James No. I asked him how to pronounce his last name. He said no. I'll do my best I can. James, class of 2024 biology major on the pre-med track and a philosophy minor. James is president of the Pre-Medicine Society, a member of the Korean Student Association, and is currently conducting research in Dr. Karen Barron's research lab. And now to lead this panel, referee any disputes, call balls and strikes, and help us understand and celebrate the stories of their lives, we're proud to introduce a leading member of our DFTD board. Kenny Shue, class of 2019 magna cum laude, and you might as well try to find your way up here, Kenny, so you can get rested up, to the relief of Barclay Briggs, who was rehearsing what he was going to do if you didn't find us. Kenny has been a distinguished leader in a national movement that believes merit matters and should be acclaimed, not obscured. His book, An Inconvenient Minority, details many adverse consequences of preferential quotas in admissions and hiring. As an often interviewed critic of the excesses of what he calls the diversity industrial complex, Kenny is an active leader in the lawsuit now before the United States Supreme Court brought by the Asian American Coalition for Education, yes, against Harvard University. So stay tuned. Kenny, the floor is yours. I'm glad to have you here. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much to everybody, and thank you to the wonderful participants on our panel. You cannot imagine the kind of courage that it takes to speak out in a time like this. So, another round of applause to our wonderful panel. When I left Davidson College in 2019, my goal was to get back in some speaking role, if possible. I just didn't know that it would take the formation of entire free speech organization, panels, just for me to have that opportunity. But I got wind of the culture while I was in college, and a lot of the things that were stemming from here. My purpose here isn't to talk about myself, although my book is available. An Inconvenient Minority, bestseller, anyway. Connie has it. But my book is to really talk to these wonderful students who have graciously volunteered their time. So I'd love to start off with kind of a cold open question. So all of you lived through the COVID-19 pandemic, I assume. Tell me about that year.
Just in general or in the context of Davidson academics?
Just in the context of your time at Davidson.
It was not something I would like to repeat particularly. It felt at times as if we were locked away, so to speak. Socialization was pretty discouraged outside of Zoom classes. And it really just didn't feel like an academic setting in which students could live up to their full potential academically or socially. And to some degree, I understand that. I understand that it was a time in the world that there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things like that. But that comes with an unfortunate climate to attend school in. So it wasn't great for anyone around the world, I don't think, but particularly in an academic setting. I don't think COVID was conducive to the degree of learning that Davidson students are capable of and should be taking part in.
It was, yeah. And by the way, when someone comes up to speak, could you also introduce your name and your class year?
Absolutely. I think Governor Martin touched on this, but my name's Barclay Briggs. I am a rising senior, so class of 2024, from Houston, Texas.
Cool. Was there criticism of either the mask or the vaccine policy that was aired in public? Did you encounter any of that?
Personally, so this might be a little controversial, but I ended up not getting the vaccination. So for me, my experience at Davidson during that time was very isolating, and I don't know if they could have done it better. I'm sure they probably could have, but you had to get tested weekly after, like, when only the vaccinated people were, like, didn't have to. And so it kind of was like something where you're kind of put on a pedestal, and it might have been something that was in my head, but that's the way I perceived it during that time. So it felt like a little bit more of a hostile environment than it probably should have.
And what's your name?
Oh, sorry. I'm Keely Copper, class of 2023, so I just graduated.
Keely,
and I'm from North Carolina.
what was the, what do you mean as in, like, you were not vaccinated, and so how did that affect your status at campus?
There are a lot of things which was very valid for them to do, but that I couldn't take part in. And while I was doing every protocol that I needed to do while not being vaccinated, I was still very isolated. I was a lot of the time the only one having to wear a mask. I wasn't allowed in our locker room. I wasn't allowed in the classroom in the very beginning. A lot of moments like that where it just was very isolating.
Did you ever get an opportunity to talk to someone about this and maybe say, you know, just because I'm not vaccinated doesn't mean that I should be treated in this way?
I did, not in person, but a lot of emails were sent, very respectful emails, especially amidst people in the health in the health center. And so I got to share my opinion on it. Whether or not it was necessarily valued could be debated, but I at least had the opportunity to give it.
What was the response that you got from them?
It was kind of like, it's my way or the highway type of thing. So you're going to follow the rules or you won't be allowed on campus, essentially.
Okay. Interesting. Was this is open to anybody. Did you ever see a Davidsonian article or maybe a newsletter from Alumni Communications or Student Communications saying, we understand that there are people who disagree with our mask policy and vaccine policy? So
I don't know if I ever saw a Davidsonian article to that effect. That doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't one published, but I don't know if I ever saw one.
what would you have suspected the reaction would have been like if someone decided to actually try to publish an article criticizing the mask policy?
I think, like Keely said, there would be sort of an attitude of like my way or the highway, and you know it's a school that we all chose to attend. So to some degree, that's, you know, we made our own bed in that sense. But I think that would have been the reaction.
Cool. All right. Next topic. So, now I'd love to hear from Lindy or James, and tell us about diversity, equity, and inclusion at Davidson. What is Davidson's position on this?
I think that Davidson's very supportive of the diversity and inclusion. We have a club on our soccer team where like a few of our teammates run, and they'll like send out awareness and do like articles and like different events at Ada Jenkins to kind of like bring the community together as a whole. That's just something that we do with our team.
And what kind of events are those?
We've done like community garden work at the Ada Jenkins Center, which helps like families that are in need and like children that like aren't getting the help they need in school and like after school activities.
Got it. So would you say diversity, equity, inclusion is viewed pretty positively on campus then, you would say?
To an extent, yes. I think there's definitely a big push for that at Davidson than compared to other schools. I actually transferred from a different school, completely different than Davidson, my junior year. So I didn't actually go through the COVID year here, but there's definitely, Davidson is definitely more pushy for the DEI.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any feelings one way or another about whether some of these policies are acceptable, or are they too heavy-handed?
Yeah, I'd like to speak on that as like a minority student. Yeah, I think
What's your
diversity. I'm James, from Tampa, Florida, and I'm a class of 2024. But as a minority student, I think diversity comes to the forefront of most conversations that we have on campus. Now, whether or not it's sort of kind of takes effect in the conversation is kind of more case by case, but there's always a hyper awareness around making sure that you are inclusive and including minorities in discussion. And oftentimes it kind of blurs the quality of the conversation. You're almost having to, kind of almost hold yourself from speaking what you truly believe in trying to acknowledge the fact that there's a movement toward diversity. And
Can you give
inclusion.
me an example?
Yeah, I've taken a lot of classes in philosophy as a philosophy minor, and a lot of like long-standing traditional sort of viewpoints have often been met with a lot of criticism through the lens of diversity. Like, it's hard to think about them off the top of my head currently, but if I do come up with one, I'll get back to you. But yeah, I know it's definitely shaped the academic sphere and the way I've experienced Davidson. And I'm hoping that through this initiative, we can kind of tame the whole diversity, inclusion, kind of hyper awareness that tends to make its way into conversation today.
Yeah, that's very interesting, this hyper awareness that you talk about, James. Would you say that people would assume certain perspectives from you because you are a minority?
Absolutely. I think we
Yeah.
all make assumptions as to where we stand on certain views, especially as a minority student coming to Davidson. I think there was a lot of assumed positions, especially in discussion about like politics for one. Immigration is a great example of one where I think people kind of assumed the position I took. I think on the whole, it kind of is discouraging in a way, knowing that like I'm met with sort of this level of expectation of what my beliefs are, and I'm hoping that like kind of going forward, I can, in this initiative, I can sort of speak freely on what I believe.
Yeah. So you wish that a true diversity policy would respect the fact that there's also intellectual diversity, and respect the fact that just because you're a certain skin color doesn't mean you believe a certain way, or doesn't mean that you want to say things a certain way.
Absolutely. I think I'm more like politically leaning. I'm more a product of where I was raised. Florida is, as you know, a pretty conservative state. And so, yeah, I think I take a lot of positions that are not popular at the college, but they're ones that I feel timid about expressing just due to the fact that I have this upheld expectation of holding a minority viewpoint. Yeah.
If I could add, I'm Yusuf Ahmed, class of 2025 from Toms River, New Jersey, and I think with what was said previously, when certain minority groups have, a chance to preach what they believe, I think there's also a degree of you're not really. It's hard to combat those beliefs and kind of speak up against those beliefs and challenge them intellectually in fear of some type of to say cancel culture would be a rough way to describe it, but going against some of these minority groups' stronger held beliefs could in some eyes be a little bit dangerous on campus at times.
Would you say that you would, like, for example, be the target of an ad hominem, an attack on your personal character or you as a person?
Yeah, I do. I think that a lot of times those kind of things, they can get emotional, and you know, if you're disagreeing with a certain group and they're not happy with what you're saying, and what you're saying might be, you know, purely off of belief and, you know, evidence, but if they don't have anything really to attack you on, it might be more of an attack on your personal qualities.
Yeah. So there are definitely viewpoints that are more marginalized than others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thanks for that, Yusuf. Anyone else on this topic? Love to take a question from the audience. Yes.
How long was the COVID lockdown limitations that the college did or that you experienced?
Let me retrack my memory and get a timeline for you. Once we came back, my sophomore year, so freshman year was when it started. We were sent home early in the spring. I came back in the fall of my sophomore year, and we were online, weren't sure if we were going to have a soccer season. Everything got pushed back. It was crazy. And the vaccine didn't come out till the following, like, January time. So that time it was kind of just, things were chaotic. No one knew what was going on. And once the vaccine started really getting pushed, I was kind of like, I don't really know if I want to get this. I want to have, like, if it's something that's going in my own body, it should be my choice. So whether or not I, like, believe in the vaccine can be another discussion, but my whole thing on it was that I didn't feel like I should be pushed to do something if I don't want to do it. And so it's kind of like I don't want to be told what to do kind of situation. So after that spring semester, I came back my junior year. I'd also torn my ACL, which also put a damper on things, but that was when, that fall of my junior year, I wasn't allowed in the locker room. I almost wasn't allowed to get like training that I needed in order to rehab for my knee. I had to be masked up a lot more often than everyone else. And it wasn't until the spring semester when they started loosening things and I didn't have to wear a mask in the classroom anymore. Yes. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
I think it was really about a full 2 years, it sounds like, that from the March of 2020 when the COVID outbreak happened till things were somewhat normal.
And
Go ahead, Yusuf.
If I could touch on what Keely talked about. So I'm class of 2025, so I was fortunate enough to miss the COVID year where most things were shut down and online. But I'd say coming in as a freshman the following year, when they were still kind of on the brink, I think it was a little bit more scary because, you know, coming in as an athlete, there was a little bit of pressure on us to get the vaccine because, like Keely said, if you didn't get it, you were kind of going to be pushed to the side a little bit when it came to, you know, you're not able to use the locker room with the team. We might be in the weight room. You've got to be masked up while working out, and so that was just a scary thought as somebody who hasn't been here before, and, you know, not wanting to be kind of separated from the rest of the group, which I think, you know, I was somebody who got the vaccine as well as the majority of the freshman class coming in who, you know, if I had a little bit more time to decide, I don't know that I would have made that same decision.
I'd also like to make note that masking policy and vaccine policy is still like a very current topic in academic setting today. I've had a few classes even past COVID where a mask is mandatory, like it's not a choice. It's something that you show up to class or you're, with a mask or you're not allowed to participate. And to me, that's an extremely limiting choice considering like it should be a free option as a student. I'm a partaker as much as anyone else in the student community, and I think it's pretty limiting in a way.
We'll get to more questions later. What is Davidson sports teams, I guess for Lindy and Keely, I think you guys had in sports. What is their view on transgenders in sports?
I don't know if there is a view that any of the sports teams on Davidson's campus officially take on that topic. I don't think that the need has arisen for any of Davidson's athletic teams to officially create a policy on that front.
So there is no official policy right now.
To my knowledge, there isn't one. No, but that doesn't mean there isn't one. That just means that to my knowledge, there is not one.
Comment from Keely or Lindy, any?
I think it's kind of one of those situations that Davidson personally hasn't had to face yet, so there's not really any basis to kind of go off of to create a policy, I guess.
Cool. Sure.
Yeah. I'm also on the football team, so I'm also an athlete at Davidson. I think the question is kind of one that is, I think we're kind of being a little touchy about the question, but I think that, of course, everyone should be allowed to have their own decision or choice on this topic, and I personally think that transgenders should be able to compete in their sport with the gender that they were assigned at birth, just due to fairness. I know we talked about this in one of my communications class, a lot of study done about even hormone suppression therapies, things like that, where at the end of the day, some of these athletes are still at a major advantage. So I think the most fair thing to do would be to compete with the sport that you're assigned at birth.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a woman applying for the men's football team, I would be bravo almost. And also, I'm scared. But so what do you feel, what is your hope? And this is available to everybody. What is your hope for Davidsonians for freedom of thoughts and discourse's role in making Davidson a freer, better, and more excellent college?
I hope that it can make more of an impact in the classroom because for me, I've personally had experiences where my professor, the first day of class, kind of put her views out there and what she expects, and like I've had assignments and papers that I've written to her views, so I would get like a better grade in a class, or like I would not step on any toes in presentations and stuff. And I hope that like more awareness can be brought so I can like have my differing opinion even if it's not aligning with my professors.
And on the other side of that, I had a professor this past fall semester who I thought did a really good job as far as, we spoke on self-censorship and freedom of speech, and he flat out said on the first day of class, what's said in this class, speak your mind, don't hold anything against somebody because they had a viewpoint that you didn't agree with. And I think with what we're doing here, I think it'd be great if we saw a lot other professors adopt that same kind of motto.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if there's a level of accountability within the alumni on the professors, the administration, to uphold freedom of speech and discourse in the classroom, that would be amazing. Because I know as a student, I want to have the freedom to speak my mind, speak my beliefs without criticism, without feeling a pressure of cancellation from students or peers. And I think professors, that, just to reiterate, have that power, have the ability to like maintain a safe environment to freely speak.
Yeah. We'll take a question now. In the back. Yes.
Hi, thank you all very much. It's really, really interesting to hear. My question is, what's kind of, if you or someone that you've observed says something controversial, what is the worst thing that can happen? I mean, can it actually, have you ever seen it actually affect someone's grade, or they are called a racist, for example, or something like that? Or what is it that happens?
If they say something in a classroom setting or just in a social setting, or
Say either one, yeah.
I think more than anything, just ostracism in the minds of other students. You quickly become labeled as, insensitive or a racist or any number of things. That tends to follow students for longer than might be necessary. I think that's probably the worst case scenario is that you become ostracized among your peers. I would imagine that your grade might be impacted to some degree, but I think ostracism from your peers would be worst case scenario.
And I think the worst part about that is that a lot of times if it's in, say, a classroom setting where you say something and there's no other conversation that goes on after that, and somebody might take a belief or have a viewpoint or opinion of you, and you just have no chance to like explain to them your viewpoint and, you know, tell them why you believe that. You're just automatically labeled, and, you know, there's nothing else after that.
I think like in the classroom setting, like it doesn't affect your grade directly. Like they haven't been like, you're going to get a bad grade because you shared this view. It's more of like the comfort to like being comfortable, like going to office hours and seeking help in that aspect with your peers or with your professor that makes it more challenging.
So there's like a lack of, there's a lack of, I guess, a proactive effort among faculty to ensure that even if your view isn't popular, that we should try to treat people, you know, and try to respect people no matter what their view is.
I think most faculty
There's probably exceptions.
probably genuinely believe that students should be able to voice their opinions, whether or not those opinions are controversial. I think that by far the majority of Davidson faculty have the best interests of students in their best interest in mind. But whether or not that interest gets communicated to the students is a whole other deal. And it would certainly be valuable for faculty members to go out of their way to reassure students that you're more than safe to voice your controversial opinion in this class without facing any sort of formal backlash, at least from me, and hopefully from your peers.
Then what was the, sorry, go ahead.
No, go, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Then what was the problem, what was the issue that some faculty had with the Davidson signing the Davidson Principles of Free Expression, which basically says the university is not a safe space for one particular idea, even if views are meant to be said that are offensive, potentially, they should be aired out. Why was there any resistance to that at all?
Well, I'm sure that some faculty members do believe that students should be censored to some degree. And I don't know names or anything like that of faculty members that believe one way or another, but I truly believe that all Davidson faculty members have their students' best interest in mind and are there because they're passionate about teaching and passionate about their students. And whether or not they communicate that by trying to be protective of their students and shield them from controversial opinions or not, I didn't mean that all faculty members were pro free speech. I just meant that they have Davidson students' best interest in mind, whether or not they communicate it in the way that you and I might view as our best interests.
Cool.
Yeah, if I could add, I just want to just note that we're all unaware of the biases we bring, regardless of what we say, regardless of what we act or believe. We're unaware of the biases that we present. And I think the same goes for faculty members as well. So when there's like this...
Speak for yourself. I have no biases.
Oh, yeah, I believe it. But yeah, when this movement initiative was met with no resistance, I like to believe that everyone believes that freedom of speech should be, you know, brought in the classroom setting. But again, people are unaware of their biases, and so in a classroom setting where we're having a lively discussion or a debate, like biases are going to arise, and that's the end of it. That's it.
Yeah. And I would just add, just personally, that we can get past the first level of discussion. You know, the first level of discussion is, I have this opinion, you have that opinion. Okay, so what are you going to do with it? You know, there's a way to like never get past that first level of discussion, which is not talk about the idea, just attack somebody's character, or just disengage or ignore it entirely, or just pretend like the other side of the viewpoint doesn't even exist. Those are all ways to never get past the first level of discussion. If you ever want to get back to the second level of discussion, where the people are actually challenged and real education happens, you have to ask the question to the other side. Why do you believe the way that you do? What's your justification? What's your rationale? And if they don't have a good rationale, you don't have to believe what they believe, but at least give them the chance to say it and to really listen and hear them out. Another question? Yes.
I'm just curious, to what degree, when you're in the classroom, do you feel that there's indoctrination of the professor's personal views versus education? In other words, how much of that seeps into the classroom? How much do you see and experience where the professor's trying to promote their ideas or their views onto you? I'm just curious.
I have a pretty specific example. I like right around the 2020 election, I was specifically asked if I had participated in the election and who I voted for. That's a pretty alarming, like very, very alarming, especially considering each one of the class members on Zoom were going around like basically saying their political affiliation in a class completely unrelated to politics. So there are definitely direct instances where views and biases make their way explicitly into the classroom and sort of have this peer pressure sort of effect. But in other ways, like course curriculum are also kind of geared to make us aware of of certain biases or viewpoints. Biology courses, for example, we explore a lot of race-based biology, stuff like that, and that comes to play a lot. But at the end of the day, while it's pretty it's pervasive in the academic space, I'd say.
I also, just to speak on that really quick, I took the intro poli-sci class when the election was going on my freshman year or sophomore year. And every article we read, every perspectives piece that we read or talked about was always one-sided. We never, I was kind of hoping it was something to just here are the facts, this is politics in a nutshell, and it was just, this is one side. You're not going to see a glimpse of the other side.
So there was an expectation, you come in from high school, you come into college, and you say, wow, it's a liberal arts college, man. That means that people are going to have such a commitment to free inquiry and the pursuit of honest truth. And you come in, and really what you're seeing is not that. It is more ideologically slanted, one-sided, and sort of marginalizing of the other side.
Absolutely.
Cool. Go ahead.
Were you brave enough to counteract that? Whom would you seek? Whose advice would you seek? Because that's absolutely ridiculous. And I was, John, is it John?
James, sir.
I was wondering, did anyone demur from telling his vote, his or her vote, and his or her affiliation? Did it say, look, we're in algebra class, or whatever? It's not relevant. I'm not going to share that. I'm sorry, there's two questions.
I'll speak on the first question you asked. In the beginning, I definitely was not brave enough, especially with how crazy the social environment was during the time, and especially with COVID and all that going on. Towards the end of the class, I got a lot more fed up with it because it kind of got exponentially worse as it went on. And so the last paper that I wrote, I ended up with an A in the class, so I guess it was fine, but I definitely put my opinion in there. So in the classroom setting, which it was on Zoom, I wasn't as brave as I wish I had been in hindsight.
Yeah. Well, you guys don't even know how unbelievably brave you are already stepping out like this. And you also may not know exactly, but perhaps do, how much in the corporate real life world these ideals will continue to be put to the test. Whether you guys want to be doctors, engineers, work in banks, it's all out there. DEI is all out there. Political statements from company CEOs are all out there. This is just, when they say college is the laboratory for the rest of your life, it really is, in all the good and bad ways. Go ahead.
I'm curious if I can hear from each of you, what would you like to see this group of alums, I'm curious if I could hear each of you, just from your own perspective, what would you like to see this group, this body, right? Like, what would you like to see them do to help foster, continue to foster a more open discourse, open society on campus, right? Like, what practical steps do you think DFTD could do to help you, to help the whole student body, to help the college?
Go ahead, Yusuf.
I think, first of all, just being here, being at events like this is a huge step. And I guess after that, just the same way that students might have civil discourse and speak about issues and speak about our viewpoints, I think it'd be beneficial for, I know we have staff in the audience and other alumni, and I just believe for you to have these kind of discourses with your colleagues about, why you feel that this is important, I think that could be beneficial and maybe open up some minds to get a lot more people on the same page.
I agree with Yusuf in that events like this and showing face and saying, like, there are real people who support your desire to communicate openly, regardless of whether or not your opinions are accepted by the majority. So just support more than anything, showing up to events like this. I don't know how practical it would be to have some sort of on-campus force that has a way of enforcing a student's ability to speak freely in the classroom or in social settings without reasonably speak freely, that is, without facing just some sort of backlash that outweighs the severity of what they say. But more so than anything, showing up to things like this, just being active in supporting students' right to freedom of expression and free discourse.
I think also instilling a sense of confidence in people that they can have those discussions. Like, you can, like, bring up controversial topics if you don't believe in something. Like in that political science class, I wish I had said something, and there are probably a lot of people in that class that might have had the same ideas as me, but I wasn't brave enough to say it. So I think having conversations and being like, no, voice your opinion. It's okay. There are people out there that are going to back you up.
Going off of kind of what Keely just said, is kind of reaching out to like the incoming freshmen, I think would be important, because they're probably the most nervous and the most uncomfortable, especially like with speaking in the classrooms.
I really appreciate the alumni support that we've seen. I know Davidson has an amazing alumni network with very generous donations and very generous contributions to the Davidson community. I think making it more explicit that what your contributions like sort of are used for or meant for, to keep administration accountable, to keep faculty accountable, to keep professors accountable toward making sure that like a liberal arts education is true to what it is would I think go pretty far in supporting free speech around Davidson campus.
Lindy, one of the proposals from Professor Ike Bailey, whom you may know, is to have a symposium every year on freedom of speech, freedom of expression, bringing speakers who would take opposing views on that topic, for example, as well as on some of the other controversies that are out there. And in addition, he's proposing that we include an element on freedom of expression and the statement, the Davidson statement, within the freshman orientation. Now, you've all come through some version of freshman orientation, and the response he gets, that we get, is that, well, it's too crowded already. There's not room to put that in. Can you think of, do you think that's true? Is it too crowded that you can't eliminate anything, or do you feel like you could make room for it, that it's important enough to do that, so that students will start off knowing that there's somebody on your side?
I think orientation definitely is very crowded, but I think that like there's definitely room for like a 30 to 45 minute speaking session, or even just like we had like OTMs, which were like leaders of like Davidson students, just like having like conversations in like the classrooms before and after events that they would take us to could be beneficial as well. I they don't want to add it like as a scheduled programming.
Also, maybe worth noting is that orientation applies not just to freshmen, but also new students. If anyone was like curious as to why Lindy went through it as a transfer student also go through new student orientation.
And the purpose of orientation is to acquaint new students with the culture of Davidson, right? So to me, there would, if you truly believe that free speech is a part of your culture at Davidson, you would acquaint people with these skills about how to have controversial conversations. I have a question. It's our first controversial question. Just kidding. So my question is, there is, as you know, that there is a push among some people to have Davidson adhere more towards the Christian tradition in which it was founded, and it was founded by Presbyterian ministers, and it was founded to be a Christian university. Davidson still holds a Christian influence, but have recently passed policies that have asserted that they do not necessarily require their president to be Christian. How much do you feel that Christianity is, and the Christian influence of Davidson is asserted on campus, maybe relative to something like diversity, equity, and inclusion, if we just wanted like a guide mark? And then what is your position on Davidson's requirement?
Well, speaking first on the relative prevalence between Christianity and DEI on Davidson's campus, beyond, I think there are a handful of plaques and things like that around campus that have various Bible verses and maybe an image of some sort portraying the crucifixion or something to that effect. To my knowledge, there's really not much of an intentional Christian presence institutionally on Davidson's behalf. I know DCPC exists, and there's just kind of relics of the bygone age, so to speak, of Davidson's Presbyterian past. And there, of course, is a chaplain's office and all that kind of thing, but it's not, I don't think, pushed very hard by administration at all. And it's possible that there are situations that I'm just unaware of in which it has been pushed by Davidson's administration. But I'm not aware of a whole lot of pro-Christian activity on Davidson's, the administration's behalf. So that's kind of part A of your question there. And then part B, I'm a Christian. Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and I think that personally I would love for the president to be Presbyterian. That there are plenty of people who disagree with me there, and I don't think being a Christian necessarily impacts the president's ability to serve as president one way or another. But I'm all for it, but that's just an example of my bias perhaps coming to the forefront there.
I would probably echo exactly what Barkley said. Over my 4 years, I didn't really feel a strong presence of Christianity being pushed by the administration. And I think it would be really nice to see a little bit more of that, just because I think it can instill some really great, like, core moral values, even if you're not Christian. And I also think that having a Christian president can kind of mimic that in a way.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also just going to agree with what both of you said. I don't think I've really heard much or I don't think I'm very aware of a lot of Christian influence that I've heard kind of pushed. I think you kind of hear a lot more about some type of viewpoints that I would say oppose Christianity, and I think those are kind of viewpoints that are a lot more well-known around campus and a lot more heard by the student body.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, one reason why I'm curious is because if there is no Christian influence constructed into the culture of Davidson, then what is the point of calling yourself a Christian university, which it is sold to donors and alumni in that way? So, but it's good to get the firsthand accounts, for sure.
Yeah, I would like to know the influence of Christianity as an alumni or as a previous student. I'd echo exactly the opinions presented before me, but I'd really love to hear, like, maybe after this, how Christianity played its influence in Davidson College community and culture.
Great.
We had to speak Latin all the time.
Recite your favorite Bible verse, I'd imagine, as well.
Great. We'll take another question. Go ahead.
My question is related to outside speakers and any controversy related to them. That seems to be what makes the headlines these days, the speakers getting shouted down at campuses. One of the reasons I joined DFTD, I hope never to see Davidson's name in that group. But I wonder, in your experience here, have you had any truly controversial speakers in which the college had to take a stand, either supporting free speech or they backed down? Any examples?
I have kind of a smaller scale one. I don't really know how the college necessarily perceived this, but at least in my day-to-day activities of how it all went down, there was a pro-choice group, or no, pro-life group that was coming to speak on campus, which was great because I think Davidson tends to not really get those type of speakers normally. And so a friend of mine was part of the Planned Parenthood organization on campus. And so her and all the other Planned Parenthood members decided to park up in front of, I think it was the Lilly Gallery where they were coming to speak, and sold gave out Dunkin' Donuts for free, gave out pamphlets for Planned Parenthood, and in a way kind of just like deterring people from not going in to attend the pro-life speaker, because that's obviously kind of a pro-choice organization. So I don't know if the college did anything to handle that, but that's kind of on a student body level how things like that are perceived.
Incidentally, that pro-life speaker was actually participating in a debate on whose children are they in elementary school. Do they belong to the school, to the classroom, or do they belong to the parents? And she was taking the view that belonged to the parents, but she was ashamed for her views on that topic.
Have there been any speakers canceled that were supposed to come and there was an outcry among the student body and Davidson canceled them coming?
Not that I know of. I think we've avoided that so far. But thankfully, I think Davidson students tend to be, on the whole, a pretty classy bunch. And so I don't know if we would run into a situation on Davidson's campus quite like that we saw at something like Stanford, where that judge was shouted down as viciously as he was. At least I would hope that Davidson students would handle that in a better way than the Stanford students did. It's certainly possible that I could be wrong, but I'm hoping that I'm correct.
Go ahead.
And that's something that I think that when these speakers come in and they're shouted down, I think that the school could do a better job of discouraging that, whether it be through some type of punishment or something like that. But I just think that that's important to protect our freedom of speech. And I think if the school truly wants to protect our freedom of speech and wants to support us in that, I think that taking a step to hold people accountable that are kind of fighting that would be really something I'd like to see.
We'll go with in the back.
Okay, so I am a American government instructor, so I experience what it's like to teach kids and get them to actually open up and talk. And unfortunately, it's for me as an instructor, I want to hear all the differing perspectives, but students, it takes a while for them to really like warm up and realize it's a safe environment. But what I'm curious about is, regardless of whether or not you took an American government class, did you find that most of your classes were always teaching you what to think, or did they push you on how to think? Because something that I really noticed, my students, it's almost like they don't know how to think. They're expecting me to tell them exactly what to think, and this is it. As opposed to, let me get you guys to think about what it means to actually think for yourself, to challenge things, to actually want to understand what it is that you're learning. Does that make sense? So did you find that you were mostly taught what to think or how to think?
I'd just like to say I really applaud your encouragement. Yeah, please. Yeah, on the whole, I think it depends. It's a class-to-class basis, obviously, but a lot of it is what to think. We're presented with information. We're told to write on that information, and in that regard, it is, write this information that's presented to you. I was fortunate enough to get brought up and think kind of similarly, like along the same lines, like triangulate, like look at different viewpoints, look at each side of the argument, look at the neutral argument as a whole, and kind of develop your thoughts based on that. I think that's a little bit lacking in the Davidson curriculum today, unfortunately. But yeah, I really do applaud your commitment to speak.
I think, like James said, for something like calculus, like, all right, like, here's how you do calculus. Let's just go ahead and get that done. But in like the realm of political science or, a more social-oriented class, I think that on the whole, Davidson isn't a train wreck in that regard. Like, there's a pretty good amount of how to think rather than what to think. And maybe I'm being a little optimistic there, but I think it's not as bad as some people might make it out to be in that regard. There certainly is some element of what to think, but it's not as bad of an issue as some might make it out to be, I think.
Well, Barclay, you should know that you can get the derivative of a function by learning the formula or by doing the Taylor series. So maybe you could do some how to think too in math.
You'd know better than I would, Kenny, on that front. I'll tell you that.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
In pretty much any organization, the climate of a institution is set by the leader. How would you describe, say, the Quillen years that you've been exposed to versus the Hicks year so far? How much do you think was percolating down from the top?
Unfortunately, my experience under President Quillen was only that of the COVID years. So my experience with her was certainly not what the prior 8 years or whatever it was with President Quillen. But it seems that President Hicks, I've had a number of Zoom calls that I've either listened in on or seen a recording of that surround this topic through DFTD or what have you. And he seems like he, at least in word, is supportive of DFTD's mission. So far also with, he's been somewhat supportive, at least with the commitment to free speech deal. So I can't really speak to President Quillen particularly, but it seems like President Hicks has been supportive, at least in word. I'm not sure what actions he's taken explicitly, but it seems like he's been supportive, at least in word.
I would also agree with that. I think it's kind of hard to very fine-tunedly tell you how it was under President Quillen because everything was COVID for us, but it does seem like President Hicks has a good grasp on like how to run things really, really well and like actually get the freedom of thought, freedom of speech going.
I think on the whole, the role of the president isn't really felt amongst the student body. I don't know if it's echoed amongst my colleagues here. But yeah, President Quillen, I think there is work to be done in establishing the president as like the leadership role, especially in voicing their opinions. President Hicks, as so far in the past year, has done a pretty good job of that. But again, like supporting him and like making sure that he voices that opinion is crucial to a good presidency amongst the Davidson College students as well.
Which end do we have? Okay, cool. I wanted to ask you guys what your aspirations, your hopes for yourself are going into the future. And then maybe we could even have some feedback from the alumni here as to what kind of place that is, especially people who have experience in those places.
Like professional or personal
Yeah,
aspirations, or
professionally,
just
personally, yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I guess professionally, I'm an economics major, so I guess that could be taken into a whole lot of different industries. I've been pretty intentional the last several summers about working and interning in a variety of different industries, mostly back in Houston, where I'm from. So I would imagine that after graduation, I'll pull the trigger on something in that world and work for a couple years, and maybe circle back and get an MBA if I think that would be beneficial to my long-term career. And if not, I'll just be working, and I'm not entirely sure in what field, but we'll see. I guess personally, I'd love to finish out strong here at Davidson, athletically on the football field, and solidify those relationships that I've made over the last 3 years, and solidify those for the future, and then start working and settle down at some point and marry and have kids and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess like pretty standard life aspirations, nothing really crazy, but yeah.
Wow, sounds like the American dream.
Maybe a white picket fence at some point too.
You had to say white. I'm just kidding. I can make jokes like that. Anyway, anyone can. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm a biology major currently on the pre-medicine track, and I hope to go to medical school after my years at Davidson, and hopefully go into orthopedics. And that's what I say based off of the experiences I've had so far. This morning, I've just started a job at Nova Huntersville Medical Center, and I saw some things this morning that I've never seen before as far as surgeries, and I didn't faint. So I think I think I'm still heading down that same path unless something else I see changes my mind.
I was a biology major, so I'm obviously kind of interested in medicine, that sort of thing, and I am applying to vet school over the summer, so my intentions are to become a veterinarian. I'm currently thinking of doing more large animal because I think there's like a lot of interesting things going on in livestock and that sort of thing that not only I want to help with medicinally, but also kind of just I'm interested in the whole business side of things and just understanding how that part of the world works.
I hope to complete my PhD in chemistry in the fall, specifically in organics. Specifically in organic synthesis with pharmaceutical targets, and I'm not sure where that'll take me because it's going to be 5 years, but hopefully in industry or academia are my two targets for work.
Yeah, and I'm similar to Yusuf. I'm pre-medicine at Davidson. My hope is to go to med school in the coming years and go into primary care. I really want to make an impact on the current state of medicine. I think it's a little bit more business-oriented and less patient-centered. And so I'm hoping that I can bring my experience, my Davidson education to the medical field.
These people need these friends here are extremely high achieving. Anybody have any advice on any of these tracks? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some advice for the medically inclined, you've probably read Steve Bergman's or Samuel Shem's seminal book about internship, but he's just finished another one called Man's Fourth Greatest Hospital about Mass General, which we used to call the massive genital, but never mind that. It's to the point of the corporatization of medicine. Is very, very distressing. So please, it's Samuel Shem is his pen name, and I heartily recommend it. He's a great fellow and a good doctor too.
Well,
And also the orthopedics. My orthopedics professor characterized orthopedists as big as a bear and almost as smart. So,
I guess I've got to put some more weight on then.
yes.
Good afternoon. I'm going to honor Kenny's request from early on by introducing myself, although I guess his request was primarily aimed at the panel. My name is Dan Carroll. I'm a longtime practicing lawyer in Richmond, Virginia, and I graduated from this wonderful college in the last century, so we'll let it go at that. I want to thank all of you for your participation and also to urge you to stick with your positions, be open to other positions, but stand firm. And as we're taught in Romans, don't let the world squeeze you into its mold. But before we leave here this afternoon, I don't want to leave without getting an answer from James to that wonderful question that was posed earlier, but we got sidetracked relating to the Zoom class that you mentioned and the request, I guess the instruction that you reveal how you voted in the 2020 election. And the question was, as I recall it, did anybody demur? Did anybody say, that's just, I don't want to share that with you?
It was a pretty small class, and from what I could tell, it was very one-sided. I personally chose to say I did not vote in the election. I didn't want to have to go through that, jump through those hoops, go down that rabbit hole with the professor, knowing his perspective and his bias. That was a decision made out of the fact that I was unable to communicate with him like outside of class. It was a Zoom class. I didn't want to like go and outside of office hours and talk to him about it, especially if I think the way I was evaluated was probably based on my answers and stuff like that. So unfortunately, no one really kind of spoke up against it. And that was kind of like that. In the pre-med field, I'll just generalize this, like grades are pretty important, I'm sure, as some of you know. So there's a lot of pressure to adopt a certain sort of complacency almost, just to make sure that you can get the grades to go on. So that answers your question.
Thank you. That leads me to one follow-up question, and that is, what your view is of the extent of diversity across the Davidson faculty. And I'm thinking in part of political diversity, but in part of what we might call worldview diversity across the faculty from the standpoint of your own experiences with the faculty.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the like? I understand. Like, so are you like asking about like political orientation or like?
Well, we can dwell on that for a moment, because I think there was some mention earlier about some preconceived notions given by one or more professors, and I think some of us in the alumni ranks tend to think that the faculty is less diverse in its thinking and its viewpoints than we believe it ought to be, because we hear so much about the preaching of DEI and diversity, and yet so much of this seems to be coming from those who do not truly believe in diversity unless that diversity echoes their own point of view.
Right. Yeah, pretty interesting point, just as like a little sidetracked. I was doing a little reading up today, and I actually found that UNC School of Medicine is actually denouncing the DEI initiatives that are taken at that med school. So they are reevaluating and actually going and making new initiatives to try and combat the sort of one-track mind thinking that's happening in higher education. I think that the term liberal arts has become perverted in a sort of way. Instead of kind of, as Kenny was describing earlier, promoting freedom of speech, free discussion, intellectual growth, it's instead become sort of a progressive leaning, very trying to get students to think in a certain way about the world sort of view. And now, while that viewpoint is not generalized to the whole faculty, I think there are a few that really embody that sort of worldview, as you said it. And so it is a little bit unfortunate that we have that influence. However, on the other side, there are faculty who are phenomenal, who really like to bring in the different biases that are present in academia. And so I think, that's kind of like my view on that.
Thank you. That's encouraging.
Go ahead, Yusuf.
I just wanted to add one thing to that from your question. Personally, I think what I've experienced is that I've had a lot of professors take viewpoints on more of a progressive side, but I just wanted to pinpoint that I think a lot of that has to do with, say I did have professors that took a different viewpoint, it might be a little bit dangerous for them to speak on those viewpoints. So I think a lot of the more progressive viewpoints are ones that are more widely accepted and a little bit less controversial, and so they're more easily able to express those feelings. Whereas, professors on the other side, I'm sure that there's got to be a good amount of them on campus, but you might not hear those things because they might be a little bit more dangerous for them to say.
Yeah. That's great. You had a question?
Do professors feel free to express their own personal opinions in your classes, as opposed to focusing on these can be, common controversies, political controversies, but they could also be controversies in specific fields. Do they express their own views, or are they focused on your views and making sure you can defend them, that you're well informed, that your assumptions are sound, your arguments are valid? I mean, like the political science guy was all about their own views. They weren't, from your recital, they weren't focused on you and how you came to certain conclusions and how you thought. I never remember a professor expressing a personal view 50 years ago. I mean, it was all about me, making sure I could think through a problem. So
Really?
That's my question.
A professor never expressed a personal view to you?
Well, in a classroom, it was
Wow.
It was not about the professor's personal opinions. It might have been about a topic and how you approach the topic from different perspectives, how you think through the problem, the facts that are relevant, the arguments that you're making, to make sure that you could express yourself in writing and verbally. I mean, that was the classroom. It was, and if you took offense at getting attacked, you were in trouble, because, I mean, it was going to be coming at you and you could give it back. But Red Ernie, I mean, he did.
And a Marxist, famous in his letter to the Charlotte Observer, which he was as a Marxist to the world. In his classes, he never really expressed his political views in class.
So, because if they're expressing their opinion, they're doing it for a reason, to me, so that you will regurgitate it to get your grade. And you won't examine your own views and your own. But this is not just about political stuff. It's about religious controversies in a religion class. It's historical issues in a history class. So that's my question.
I think a lot of the times professors kind of want you to mold the way that you think in order to, like you said, kind of regurgitate their own viewpoints. I don't think it's necessarily every professor. I was on track to be a religion minor at Davidson, and then decided I didn't want to do the 4-hour seminar. So, but with those classes, I found a lot of them didn't kind of gave you an opinion, but also expressed having dialogue, and I could bring up, if I was taking a class on Judaism or something that wasn't Christianity, I could kind of compare the two in a way where I didn't feel like I was bringing up something that I shouldn't. Whereas sometimes with the political science class that I had, it was not that way, and I felt like I was having to mold the way that I thought to fit what he wanted so that I could get the grade that I needed.
My name is Clark Ross, and I've taught here now for over 40 years and have been through 10 presidential elections, and I wanted to comment on two things. One had to do with faculty expressing their own views. I would say a number of us will on occasion do that, particularly if we feel it's important to either correct an inaccuracy, because quite frankly, there are in this day and age a lot of inaccuracies floating around. Charlie Ratliff, whom so many of you know, was famous in some ways for doing that, and he used to teach in room 224 of Chambers, which was up in the corner over there. And on occasion, he would step outside the door and raise his voice and say, "I'm now Charlie Ratliff, private citizen, telling you something. I don't want this to be viewed as gospel truth to you, but I do want you to think about this, because there are some candidly inaccurate statements that are being circulated here." And he made a point of doing that. And I don't quite step outside the door, but I occasionally will say, "This is my opinion." Now, what I think you all should realize is not only has there been this issue of COVID in the 2020 period, but we had two of the most absurdly bizarre elections, 2016 and 2020, that we have ever had. And it is the only election, in some sense, that many of these students have ever seen. I can remember, I told you, I've been here for over 10 presidential elections, where with most of them, the students, there was some degree of I wouldn't even say equal division, but strong division, some for Democrats, some for Republicans, and they talked about it, and they had meaningful discussion. In 2016 and 2020, even I, who really is considered I consider myself moderate, found it very difficult to defend the discussions that were going on. It was very hard in a classroom to say, "Oh, here is free speech," when candidly Donald Trump is literally lying economically about stuff, has no economists of any repute behind him. And it was a very difficult situation to stand up there and say, "Oh, yes, he's got the right to say this." Yes, he does have the right to say this, but it was really important that students understand that there were some real inaccuracies. And there also were, particularly with the election of 2020, total impoliteness in the debate and how he conducted himself against
Was it, Dr.
our
Ross?
President Biden.
Was it important to understand? Why was it important for students
What's that?
to understand? Why was it important for students to understand?
So I think
The
it's important for
inaccuracies that Donald
students to
Trump
see that that is not a critical way of respecting someone's opinion.
In what? That is in Donald Trump's performance?
Yeah. He constantly interrupted the president. Oh, he wasn't the president then, but he constantly interrupted candidate Biden.
Okay.
You know that.
But why is it the job of the professor to point that out?
Because if we are talking about the debate, which we sometimes do try to bring into the classroom, it's very hard not to be aware of that kind of discussion.
And
It was
you're
all
trying to
throughout-
talk about the debate in the classroom?
Mhm. Yeah.
For what reason?
Well, in an economics classroom, particularly an introductory economics classroom, there's a lot of economics being talked about. And students want to know, how accurate is this and how inaccurate is this?
All right. Cool.
And the statements, particularly he made on international trade, were full of inaccuracies. They were not supported by any strong any strong economist.
I'd like to point out that.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. And then we have to end this now, and really appreciate the comments from everybody, from the student body. I'm going to close just with one little thing about myself and the reason why I wanted to get involved with Davidsonians when I first heard about it. Actually, I helped to found it. So when I was in freshman orientation in 2015, I attended a diversity seminar inside freshman orientation, which is required. It was required that people attend a portion of the orientation called diversity. And in this class called diversity, I learned from an Asian American studies professor that there is a pyramid of privilege and oppression. And in this pyramid, black people were at the bottom of the pyramid, and white people were at the top of the pyramid. And I just thought to myself, well, you know, I'm Asian, so where am I? And then this professor said, Asian people are like right in the middle, right there with Jewish people, because they are white adjacent. Yeah, they're a minority, but they also have a lot of the privilege of white people. And I thought to myself, how do Asian people have the privilege of white people? I was 18 years old. This is my first lesson, I think, in critical race theory. And I realized, oh, they really meant that Asians just work hard, and that's why we are, that's why we have the highest incomes in the United States. It's not privilege. Asians came here in like boats. They don't come here with any generational wealth. Why are they labeling us privileged? And I realized that this entire thing is bent on this idea of separating people into categories: privileged and oppressed. And that's what makes a lot of this function, because there's a desperate need to categorize groups. So that is what started my involvement with, I want to provide an alternative perspective to this. Let's talk about hard work. Let's talk about culture, which led to me writing my book, An Inconvenient Minority, which talks about the Asian American discrimination that's going on in the private universities, in the top Ivy League universities. And it eventually led to a lot of different activism and me joining the board of Davidsonians for Freedom of Thought and Discourse, and realizing that this is such an important issue that we need to tackle. Not just free speech. Free speech is one critical part of it, but the entire ideology that categorizes people into privileged and oppressed groups. So that's why I'm here today, and I just wanted to say that's part of my personal story. So I say with great sympathy to everybody here. Give another round of applause for this wonderful group. Thank you. Good.
Thank you to the panel, to Kenny. I believe Harvard University better start paying attention to this young man. If I could summarize a couple of points, I saw there are three levels of response here this afternoon. One, a theme of hesitation to disagree on a controversial topic, in some extent because it might be disapproved by others. But then secondly, there's always a sense of caution that you need to be careful that you're not just hurting someone else by saying something that's inconsiderate. And of course, we all should be conscious about that and deal with it in our interactions. But then in a few cases, we saw there was a sense of discrimination, of violation, and that's where we, as the Davidsonians for Freedom of Thought and Discourse, have to be very diligent and alert. We intend, hopefully, not only with these young people, with others that they can help introduce us to be able to get the word out that we're here on your side. If you're being oppressed or ostracized, then we will be here to try to help you to deal with that and to get a resolution of it. And one of the developments on campus, Clark, that I think is very positive and very helpful to our cause is that a group of faculty have, who, whatever their personal views are, realize that there are problems in American higher education. And they have started something, you'll see it referred to as DCI. That doesn't mean Davidson College individuals. It means Deliberative Citizenship Initiative. And you can read about it on our website, dftdunited.org, because we're following everything that they did. For example, the reference to the pro-life speaker who was part of a debate on the question of whose children are they, that was sponsored by DCI. And they met after there was a barrage of some very unkind publications or circulars that were making the rounds with the usual foul language. They called those students and sat down with them and talked with them and said, look, you're entitled to your views, you can be opposed, and you can come and you can listen, but you can't shut down the opportunity for others to hear what this speaker and the opposition have to say and how they deal with each other and how students and faculty respond to that. And I think that was a very positive and very remarkable development. And just like the alumni expression movement is spreading across alumni groups all across the United States, the same thing is happening with this deliberative citizenship initiative, and I think it's good. Now, so thank you, Kenny, and thank you to each of you for bringing us your experience and what you have learned in your life at Davidson. I want to bring next the chairman of our board of DFTD, John Craig, class of 1966 with a Master of Public Affairs degree from Princeton. John's distinguished military career, I think, honors us all, receiving the citation for heroic service in the Vietnam War. John also had an exemplary philanthropic career as Chief Operating Officer of New York City's Commonwealth Fund for 33 years. During that time, I think as a mark of true respect, he was also chairman for 20 years of Nonprofit New York, the official association of that great city's large nonprofit community. A gentleman farmer who farmed and raised this movement from Lancaster, South Carolina, John Craig.
Thank you, Governor Martin. This is a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And thank you to the student panel and Kenny for chairing it. I mean, you see the kind of students that Davidson produces all the time, the courage, the maturity, the ability to think, the ability to speak. We're very proud of you, so keep at it. Now, we owe a really special thanks to Kenny Sue, not only for moderating the panel this afternoon, but also for his foundational role in getting DFTD, Davidsonians for Freedom of Thought and Discourse, going back in 2018. As a student at Davidson at the time, his class of 2019, Kenny was courageous in forming the Davidson chapter of Young Americans for Freedom. And he was courageous in educating alumni like me, Connie Bueller, who's going to be speaking next, and so on the issues that existed on time regarding freedom of expression. We wouldn't be here without him. And Governor Martin, we owe him an incredible vote of thanks for all the work that he has done, his vast experience, his wise counsel, his gracious diplomacy, and his deep commitment has been absolutely crucial and keeping DFTD on track and getting the principles of freedom of expression enacted, and I'm going to say more about that later. Now, in addition to Governor Martin, Connie, and Kenny, on the DFT board, we also have Richard Hendricks present this afternoon. Richard, raise your hand. We have the board. If you put that first speech second slide up, our board members are listed there. We have a very strong board. Very proud of them. They're hardworking and all very, very, very committed. I'm going to pause for a moment to get the slides going here. Barkley. Okay, I'll keep going. With Kenny's help, I'm now going to do some recapping, and some of my remarks will be repetitive, but I think it's always good sometimes to hear things the second or third time. With Kenny's help, in 2018, a small group of alumni, including Congressman Greg Murphy, Connie and I wrote a letter to then President Carol Quillen outlining our concerns about speech suppression, politicization of the campus at the time, ideological imbalance, and intolerance of viewpoint, as it was reported to us, diversity at Davidson. These concerns had developed from my own personal experience and that of others on the Alumni Association Board, and from conversations with students around campus like Kenny Sue. We suggested that specific steps be taken to address the issues that we raised, and the most important being that the college adopt the Chicago Principles of Freedom of Expression. You're all familiar with them, but let me say just a word about those principles. They were developed by a committee appointed by Chicago University President Robert Zimmer in 2014, and they are regarded as the gold standard for freedom of expression on universities and college campuses around the U.S. By 2018, when we became concerned, 56 colleges and universities had already signed on to the Chicago Principles. Just to name a few: Princeton, Purdue, Johns Hopkins, Washington and Lee, Denison, Vanderbilt, Washington University, Columbia, Georgetown, UNC, George Washington, Colgate, George Mason, and Brandeis. Good company to be in, wouldn't you say? And that's just a smattering of those that had already signed. We thought that Davidson would greatly benefit from joining so many of its peers and demonstrably making a commitment to freedom of expression at a time when First Amendment rights on university campus and college campuses around the country were much under duress. In response to resistance from the college to doing so, however, we formally petitioned the Board of Trustees to adopt free speech principles, and we gathered over 300 signatories to those petitions. Those in the audience, many of you signed those. Receiving no response from the college to our concerns in 2018, indeed, we were generally told there's no problem here. And I'm sorry to report it, but that was the fact. What happened? We organized DFTD as a nonprofit entity and developed a long-term strategy for addressing the problems. We started with getting the facts. We always like to be fact-based. We wanted to be sure that what we as individuals were seeing and experiencing and were hearing about were in fact real. So to do this, we first commissioned a survey in 2021, a survey of Davidson's major donors. As you'll see in the next slide, throw that one up, that a very high percentage of influential alumni were concerned about the direction the college was headed in 2021. And this gave us confidence that we really need to dig further into this issue. At the time, Davidson was not in the annual surveys of higher ed students conducted by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE as it's known. So we commissioned in 2021 at our own expense an independent survey of students, Davidson students, modeled on the FIRE survey. This encouraged FIRE to add Davidson to its annual student survey exercise in 2022-23, and its findings for Davidson students last year mirrored what our survey had found in 2021. Let's look at these in slides 3 and 4. Start with slide 3. 69%, this is in 2022, 69% of Davidson students are fearful of disagreeing with a professor in class on a controversial topic. 45% of Davidson students are fearful of expressing their views on controversial topics, political topics in class. 72% are fearful of expressing an unpopular opinion on social media. That's the big one. You find this across the country, and I'm showing national figures there as well. Next slide, 4. 30% say that it's permissible to block attendance at least sometimes at a speaker event. 30%. Now, I'm pleased to say that at Davidson, I don't have the number fresh in mind, those who actually said it's always acceptable was something short of 10%, which is good, and that's compared to nationally. But still, the very fact that almost 10% of Davidson students think it's okay to block someone coming to deliver a speech, we find that quite disturbing. And then equally disturbing is that this is last year, 37% said that they are uncertain that the college supports freedom of expression, and a substantial percentage comparable to that said they were fearful that if they themselves came to being taken to task for having said something, that the college would defend them. And you'll note that the national figures are pretty much mirror Davidson. So Davidson is in company. I must say that the more elite the college, the more the problem seems to be. It's across the board all over the country, but it's particularly prevalent in elite colleges. With facts like these, we formally encouraged the Presidential Search Committee, formed in 2021, to include commitment to freedom of expression and increased viewpoint diversity as important traits for Davidson's next president. We were not on the committee, and that was just fine. And the committee did not list these traits in its criteria that were published, but our sense is that we were heard, and we were very delighted with that because President Hicks, I think, reflects that. Now, stepping back in the fall of 2021, we saw the first concrete fruits, and Governor Martin has already referred to this, of DFTD's efforts, when President Quillen appointed a 6-person task force of trustees, faculty, and students to draft a Davidson version of the Chicago Principles of Freedom of Expression. Governor Martin was a key member, a 6, played a major role in seeing that all of the major things got included. Now, I'm summarizing in slide 5 key features of the principles. And if you'll bear with me, I'm going to read them. I know you can read, but these are fighting words, and these are the principles that Davidson has adopted. Davidson College guarantees all members of the college community the broadest possible latitude to speak, write, listen, challenge, and learn. Our goal is to ensure the principles live, breathe, and are personified by every member of the college community. Boy, that's what we want to see happen. Second, Davidson College's fundamental commitment is to the principle that debate, discussions, and deliberation may not be suppressed because the ideas put forth are thought by some or even most members of the college community to be offensive or unwise. We have a solemn responsibility to promote the lively and fearless freedom of debate and deliberation, and will also protect that freedom when others attempt to restrict it. It is not the proper role of the college to attempt to shield individuals from ideas and opinions they find uncomforting, disagreeable, and offensive. That's so important because we know in our time, people are not supposed to be offended by anything. But how do you learn if you don't learn to take offense, deal with it, forgive, and so on and so forth? So this is a really important piece of the message. Next bullet. We concede that individuals invited to speak on campus may be controversial and contested. We should not obstruct or otherwise interfere with speakers who are invited to express their views on campus. We do not seek to censor speech or discourage protests, which might encourage critical thinking. And then the conclusion is so important. The last line, the best way to ensure progression is to recognize that true inclusion and true free speech are interdependent. Now that's a very powerful statement because the truth of the matter is, hugely significant, that as this discussion started out, it started with the assumption that there can be and often are irreconcilable differences between freedom of expression and free speech. Between free inclusion and free speech. But that's not the case according to our principles. They work together and they must. We ask, where would the civil rights movement have been had we not had freedom of expression in the 1960s? So that's an important part of the message. Now you can imagine how pleased we are that in early March of this year, as Governor Martin has said, the faculty first affirmed the principles, and then afterwards the board quickly likewise affirmed them. And how proud we are that Davidson has joined, as you see on this slide, the next slide, the now 100 colleges. Davidson was the 99th, adopting the principles or principles like them, like the Chicago principles. And Davidson was the first private college in North Carolina to do so. So at Davidson, we have made progress, but we're not kidding ourselves. The stakes are high, and in our view, much remains to be done to ensure freedom of expression and tolerance and respect for those whose viewpoints are not in the majority on campus. Accordingly, DFTD is investing for the long term. I'll turn to slide 7. First, we have established a near-campus DFTD office and hired Managing Director Savannah Damon, who you've seen running around delivering the microphones. Savannah is just doing a magnificent job. She put this whole show on, which is single-handedly, not with a staff of 6, single-handedly. Yay, Savannah. So we established an office. It's across from the Hub Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation on Delbert Street. Come by for a visit. Secondly, we do seek to establish a working relationship with President Hicks and the administration. For example, as Governor Martin has said, we are participating in the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative. Find it very useful. Savannah and I and other members regularly are engaged in that. Professor Graham Bullock is doing a terrific job, and we think that's exactly the sort of thing that the college needs to be doing and more of it, bringing in debates. And thirdly, we have provided a scholarship to rising senior Barclay Briggs, who you met on the panel, whose assignment is to reactivate the Young Americans for Freedom chapter at Davidson, and then he will use that organization and lead it, be a leader in it, to bring in speakers to Davidson, external speakers who will broaden the diversity and viewpoint of what now exists on campus. We also hope that the YAF, under Kenny's leadership, he founded the first chapter. He also created a newsletter, or a paper really, the Davidson Mirror. We have had little luck in communicating with the Davidsonian. For example, the Davidsonian did not cover, despite we requested, either of the student surveys, 2021 and 22. We find that quite astounding. Why would the Davidson student paper not cover surveys of what the Davidson students think? Beats me. So we may have to, YF may create its own paper. Now, we know that adoption of the Chicago principles is one thing, but actual activation of them throughout campus culture is yet another. For example, on this next slide, I just blown away by it. The Princeton University, the free speech organization there had a very independent survey of students done in 2023. The results are just out, and they found that at Princeton, 8 years after Princeton adopted its principles of freedom of expression, 2015, only 18% of Princeton students are very familiar with them, and only 49% are not familiar with them, vaguely or not. We certainly hope that 8 years from now, this picture will look very different when we have this question asked on Davidson student surveys. We think, hopefully, that it will be overwhelming majority will know about the principles and be well informed and living them. Now, to ensure that the Davidson commitment to freedom of expression becomes an integral part of the fabric of campus life, right up there with our venerable honor code, we're urging additional initiatives to be adopted or as outlined or pursued as outlined in slide 9. First, that a substantial component, and this has been brought up already, on freedom of expression and viewpoint diversity be added to the new student orientation. This is happening around the country. Princeton's added one. It's not great. It was better this year than it was last year. We have been assured that there's not room for it. We find that hard to believe. I've looked at the new student orientation, and believe me, I could find some slots to fit in a good segment on freedom of expression, right up there with the honor code. We do encourage the college to review all policies to ensure their conformity with the Freedom of Expression Commitment Statement. In particular, the statement, "We should not obstruct or otherwise interfere with speakers who are invited to express their views on campus." We urge development of procedures that will accordingly safeguard against speakers, and we don't have disruptions. We've been very fortunate. We haven't had these at Davidson, and I don't think we will, but let's be prepared for it, like happened at Stanford or Furman this year. Now, Davidson has made progress since 2018 in the speech code rating that FIRE gives it, based on review of the policies. We've moved up from red light in 2018 to currently yellow light. We urge doing what is necessary to get the college to green light status. People do pay attention to these ratings, and we just think we can get there. Now, beyond these short-term steps, DFD hopes to work with the college on longer-term initiatives. For example, next slide. A number of us think the college would benefit from having a formal academic center to serve as a hub for promoting viewpoint diversity and freedom of expression. Princeton has the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions, been run for years by one of the finest jurists in the country, Robbie George, as we know him, outstanding group. UNC and Vanderbilt University have recently announced plans to create such centers. The UNC School of Civil Life and Leadership, controversial, we think it's a good thing, and the Vanderbilt Project on Unity and American Democracy. Really good to have a center where there is people can go to and work on these issues that we're so enthused about. Such centers will come with endowed chairs, need endowed chairs, and DFDD is confident that we can help the college in raising the funds for such a Davidson Center, which we could well make a DFDD joint venture with the college. Ideas. As already noted, we plan to raise funds for a robust external speakers program working with the Young Americans for Freedom chapter to increase the diversity of viewpoints brought to campus. And this is on this slide. I've listed some possibilities. These are not for real, these are prototypes, but there's a great number of really outstanding people out there who are across the political spectrum and ideological spectrum on liberal versus conservative. But on free speech, this is what they're about, and they all share the view that it is important, freedom of expression on campus. Glenn Lowry, major, Columbia University. John McWhorter, major linguist. Civil rights leader Jason McNaga, incredible book on free speech. I highly recommend it. Larry Summers, who's as liberal as you get, former Harvard president, former Secretary of the Treasury, very vocal on the importance of freedom of expression. Nadine Strassen, likewise a liberal, very key on the circuit, the speaker circuit. And then Vanderbilt Chancellor Daniel Diermeyer, who is the really leading light on this center at Vanderbilt, is outspoken. And then someone like Amna Khalid, who's at Carleton, who's a woman who is really, really good on these topics. And there's just lots of people to bring Davidson to campus, and these people are not now being brought to campus, and they need to be. And then, here may be a really crazy idea. Harvard recently announced the creation of a faculty-led council on academic freedom, dedicated to free exchange of ideas as a cornerstone of reason and rational discourse. We plan and hope to entertain this with faculty members. Is there a need for such? Is there feasibility for such? For having a group of faculty members formally create such a center to ensure that those who now may be fearful of speaking their views have a place where they can. In conclusion, I want to emphasize that DFDD is a friend of the college. We're often described as an enemy. That's not the case. We love this college. It nurtured us in our youth. All of our concerns are about its future, and we want to see it maintaining its traditional record of producing courageous leaders equipped to deal respectfully with a variety of viewpoints on social and economic issues and work towards national unity. Our sense is that progress is being made under President Hicks' leadership in creating a tone of respect for different views. We see that. We applaud this and hope that in the coming years, by working together, we will be able to heal the rift within the college community that arose within the context over the last 10 years of national polarization, which we regret very much. That's our aim. Thank you.
Thank you, John. For our final speaker, another member of our board, Connie Terry Bueller, will speak to us with a very perceptive mind. Class of 1982 history major, who has made history as founder and coach of Davidson's first women's lacrosse team. She's brought that same intensity to the vital field of talent recruiting. Following a 20-year career as lead recruiter for Capital One, Connie has led several firms guiding recruitment of key executives and other personnel. Today is CEO of her own firm, CTB1, that's her initials, LLC, a successful international boutique company for recruiting financial services all-stars based in Richmond. Would you welcome Connie Bueller?
Well, folks, I drew the short straw. I'm last. I'm following the inestimable Governor Martin, that brave, smart student panel, and the one and only John Craig. And I also stand between you and your cocktail, so I will be less than 7 minutes. I also, if I have an emotional and heartfelt tone, it's because it's been my privilege and my life calling to help launch college grads into the world. I first joined the effort for what would become DFTD back in 2018 for a very different reason than the others. As backdrop, while I'd been a very loyal alum since graduating, mostly through service, I organized and ran, along with my friend Dan Carroll in the audience today, for over 20 years, the Richmond Alumni Group. And for over 30 years, I volunteered with the Davidson, first with the placement office, and then just really through word of mouth, helping Davidson students, seniors, prepare and find their first perfect job. I was proud to present Davidson students to the top investment banking, healthcare, fintech startups, consulting, financial services, international roles, and knew that the students would have a comfort level in engaging back and forth, an openness of mind, a calm confidence, and no matter the major, the desire to learn and contribute. They were ready for a purpose-driven role both in a career and in their community. You know, the Davidson brand. That Davidson brand was something I'd had to prove myself over 30 years ago when interviewing first at Capital One. Their president, a Brit, took one look at my resume and basically went like this and said, Connie, I see you're quite a local girl and you went to Davidson College. I'm not sure you could interact with the best and brightest. Might I test you? And so for the next hour and a half, he did. The very first question I'll never forget was the dates of the 100 Years' War. He then went on to have quotes like, now is the winter of our discontent, which I had to complete. And then he finished with a very serious math case. So I could have thanked Dr. Shai, Dr. Parton, and Dr. Cynthia Lewis for helping me out for the first 2/3 of that. But Smiling F. Jackson was probably laughing as I tried to set up this very complex math problem. But what I did bring was my conceptual skills, my capability to kind of line up the problem, and he said, oh my goodness, you've even added a cell here of something I hadn't thought. So we agreed to say that was good enough, and I'm so proud to say over 30 years later, every senior leader in that company is my baby out of college who took the bulls by the horn and really ran with their capabilities. Things went along pretty well for 30 years, and that Davidson brand grew. Yet around 10 years ago, something began changing in these grads. I started having difficulty finding students who could do well in interviews. It was almost as if they didn't know how to interact in an interview setting, how to have a dialogue that focused on problem solving, or even know how to properly present their capabilities in an engaging way. I was only finding a few with the gumption to propel them in this world. Let me pause and say, besides anybody we've seen today. But a couple examples, real life. One was a economics major who gave me his resume with mainly social justice causes on it. I was like, well, is there any way we can enhance your resume? Did you have a good GPA? Well, yes, I had a 3.85, but I don't want to put on my resume because it shows my white privilege. Okay. Class of 2019 woman, she said, I am only going to take a job if you guarantee I have a nice boss. Another one, a returning Fulbright, told me, I only want to work 30 hours a week because I want to commit to my social causes and my soccer games. I'm going to put an asterisk at that point, and somebody please remind me of my asterisk at the end. But that is when a light bulb went on for me. Something must have changed on campus over time. So the students spent their 4 formative years at Davidson was resulting in this dramatic change. What was going on? We had learned from our brilliant panel today of the current challenges on campus, and we've seen from John's slide that around 70% are concerned to speak up or have an opinion in class. That level of self-censorship restricts the key aspect of how to grasp a concept, debate it, and create a new idea out of combined minds. We've heard all this, yes, and their self-monitoring attributed to, on my next slide, there's a 92% increase done by Jonathan Haidt in anxiety in Gen Z kids in the last 10 years. This is, our students are graduating on the whole, not as well educated, ill-equipped to have a discussion involving an uncomfortable topic, unaccustomed at having to take a stand, and yet unbelievably with higher demands of immediate perks. Just this week, I got a request from a 23 grad with a very nondescript resume saying, please find me a great job in fintech with the most factor being my work-life balance. Okay, as an aside, next slide, the majority of students increasingly are not choosing majors to propel them. According to this 2022 Davidson Careers website, the largest majority of majors, 65 students, chose social and community services, nonprofit, and education as their field of choice. While I am not saying these aren't valuable careers, all of those 65, along with the 3 I've highlighted, could have entered those fields with a degree from a community or local college for the cost of 1 year at Davidson. We need to ensure that the value of Davidson education remains. Not only myself, but I then began hearing from employers that Davidson students were not passing first rounds. That Davidson brand I'd sold for so long felt as if it was really taking a beating. A company in Charlotte's head of HR told me 2 years ago how proud he was that their company had hired the largest number of grads that year, 5. I caught up with him 6 months ago, and he told me sadly that they'd had to let 2 of those go, and 1 was on a performance plan. But folks, it's not just Davidson grads. We have seen in studies that 1 in 8 of all Gen Zers are fired their first week of work. Could I see the next slide? These are the reasons why the survey said this came from Resume Builder of 1,344 managers. This is a nationwide problem. So the Davidson group pulled our heads up and found there were other alumni groups also fighting for free speech and thought. Davidson, the only college, along with UVA, Princeton, Cornell, and W&L, founded the Alumni Free Speech Association on January 5th, 2022, and John, Steve Smith, and I sit on their national board. More incredibly, through articles in the Wall Street Journal and through network and mentoring news schools, we have added, next slide please, UNC, Yale, MIT, Harvard, Stanford, VMI, Wofford, Lafayette, Macalester, Bucknell, and JMU. In a proud mom moment, may I say my daughter is on the JMU board. Our membership has grown to 16 schools with hopes of welcoming. We have right now on target UCLA, Williams, Dartmouth, William and Mary alumni groups, and more this year. And we have wonderful supportive organizations who partner with us. I think I've seen Brian Paul in the audience today from ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. They've been instrumental in supporting not only our efforts, but those fellow alumni across the U.S. And our own board member, Emily Coons-Jay, is Executive Director of Fund there as well. We might have in our audience Jessica Wills of FIRE, but FIRE has been an amazing group in helping with surveys across the country. And although we funded ours, they've done most of the surveys around the country, showing that around 70% of students are afraid to speak out. There are also other supporting groups. The last one I'll call out, though, right now is Heterodox. That is a group of brave 4,000 professors who put their John Hancock out in public that they support free speech. We also have in our audience today, I believe, some representatives from the Davidson administration. And like John said, we hope they feel they are in a partnership with us to ensure that learning be cherished where liberty has arisen at our beloved Davidson. Robert Zimmer, the president of Chicago, the creator of the Chicago Principles John mentioned, recently deceased, said, "Free speech is our salvation from intellectual mediocrity and social ossification." And if you don't think we can individually and collectively plant a seed and affect change in the mind of these kids, let me get back to my asterisk. About 1.5 years ago, that paralegal called me and said, "Miss Connie," it's like, ooh, okay, why is he saying that? Well, I've decided to join the Marines. Aha, miss. And I'm entering that MBA school you suggested would be perfect for my career choice. Might I call you in 4 years? To which I answered a resounding yes. Friends, take a moment to share our story at your reunions and in your communities. We can all affect change. Thank you so much.